Eyal, thank you very much. Two things I can say to you. One, now I understand how you raised the $152 million. Look the formula. Maybe there is a problem, I don't know. Where is the professor? He left. So we need to check this. But honestly, I was a little bit confused because I think the majority of the people are still in blockchain 1.0. You are already at blockchain 2.0. So we need to run and catch you very fast. But this is something that we will do. So now we will switch to the panel where we will have questions. If we will finish in time, then I will have the opportunity to have the audience here to ask questions to the panelists. But this is only if we will have time left. Currently, we are trying to, as blockchain is responsible for timing accuracy. So this is what we are going to do now. We are exactly on time. So we are starting with the panel. I would like to call the panelists, and I will start with Ricky Cheveria, which is the Vice President in Software and Service Group and the General Manager of Platform Security Division at Intel, to come to the panel. The second panelist, which I would like to call, is, sorry if I will make a mistake with the pronouncing of the name, is John Valaros. John Valaros is experienced and expert principal director in Accenture Technology Consulting Workforce based in London. He is a part of Accenture Specialist Security Capabilities with 19 years of experience in consultancy, and now is an expert worldwide in blockchain. Guys, a little bit more respect to the people on the stage. Shh, guys, please. Now we will call from IBM, Vita Bortnikov. Please come to the stage. So Vita Bortnikov from IBM, she is a distinguished engineer, and she's expert in scaling and availability. She is now leading the activity in IBM Haifa, and she's expert also on blockchain. The next panelist, also coming from abroad, from a very well-known company, GE. His name is Ras Diches. He is the Chief Security Officer of GE Digital and the General Manager of the Industrial Internet Cybersecurity Center of Excellence. In his role as a Chief Security Officer, he is leading the cybersecurity strategy, vision, and also responsible for the implementation lifecycle framework at GE platform. And last, he is also a personal friend, Chagai Zechor from Deloitte. When I want to have a meeting with him, normally what I'm doing is booking a flight to San Francisco. He will be on the plane. So Chagai, which is the Innovation Tech Terminal Leader at Deloitte. So Chagai, come on board. Pressure, you know, we make mistake. We are still a startup company. Next time on the plane, you will remember this. So let's start with the panel. We have time now. Okay. Some tricky stuff here, you know. They put me clips. So the first question that we would like to address today is the following. Why is blockchain something that is going to change the way companies are doing businesses? And what should organizations be doing in order to achieve successful future utilization of blockchain technology? So I would like to start in addressing this question first to Vita from IBM, please.
Okay. So I think in some lectures before, there are already some parts that addressed it. But actually, I would like to cite our CEO, Ginny Rometty, which states that blockchain will do to business transactions what the internet did for the information. And I think this huge audience is here because of the promise that blockchain will bring to the world. If we look on, digitalization and what it has happened in the last decades, Actually, there's a lot of things that, we brought and computers to every organization. But in many sense, many of these are still sort of a computation islands working separately. And what blockchain promises us, and I think we are all there to build it and to enable it, is to enable the communication and much more value of different companies working together, bringing value. So if you look on, financial space where blockchain, I think the first thing to happen is there were like institutes like SWIFT, trusted parties that enable transactions between banks, and there are many other examples. So this thing that you can actually do things without trusted party can make things much more fast, cheaper, and much, without vulnerabilities. And I think this is what blockchain is very important and will, bring a lot of sort of revolution to this digital world.
Thank you very much. The next question I would like to ask you, Russ, please. Okay. So what are the cybersecurity challenges with blockchain from your perspective?
So the great question, and then what I really enjoyed about some of the presentations that we just heard before is one of the biggest things that I see as a concern is really getting to the breakthrough value when it comes to what we can do with blockchains. We heard about the ability to extend their value by code execution, but then on the other side of it, we heard about how we can deal with some of the cybersecurity risks that inherently a blockchain creates by the concept of zero-knowledge proofing. I think what we're going to see is, even though we have this kind of issue of what's going to happen with protecting code and dealing with privacy and elements of data, we're also going to see new technologies that will allow us to kind of break out of some of the cyber risks that we have today. You were asking about identities and other things that you have to carry around with you. That's because we rely today on things like PKI and other kinds of infrastructure that require us to have physical elements that hold some of our digital material. So just imagine if we weigh it in that other direction and we take those concepts of code, the ability to have the digital kind of trust that we can have based on communities of folks that we build up, and then also use things to mask out the material that we consider sensitive to ourselves and others by some of the things we've seen with zero-knowledge proofs. I think we'll kind of wash out some of those cyber risks if we bring all those together. And I think what's exciting to me today is just to see that we're finally looking at the evolution of a couple of interesting areas that could deal with some of those cyber risks.
And just to add to that from the other side, I think one of the issues that we're not focusing enough on is cyber for blockchain. Because when we speak about blockchain as an ability to do stuff faster, smarter, better, and cheaper, we don't think about the aspect of how to secure it. Because unless, and blockchain is all about trust, right? We have to trust the blockchain in order to be able to use it. And still, although the platform is kind of secure, let's speak about quantum computing after, but at the end of the day, I can hack the wallet. I can hack the desktop, I can hack the mobile. So I think that the cyber aspect of blockchain are yet to be discovered, but are a crucial stepping stone in order to really achieve mass production of blockchain.
Yes, please.
So I guess the differences in traditional sort of IT systems that we build versus sort of blockchain developments that we're sort of deploying is that we're putting the users much more in control of their own information. So they're actually the ones that are managing their cryptographic keys. At the end of the day, if you want to make sure that you're protecting your blockchain assets, you have to be in control of the keys that you're protecting. So some of the challenges become very much, usability, security challenges that we have to deal with, and I think those are going to continue to be big issues for us to ensure that we're protecting the assets that we own, the ones that we're token assets that we're protecting, in addition to the fact that we now have we have to deal with concepts that are actually quite difficult for end users. So the end user aspect and the usability aspect of security is going to be critical for us to deploy these kind of solutions in the future.
Absolutely agree, and I think that keys management is going to be a huge potential activity for blockchain in general, and a solution around that is going to be something that every implementation around the world of blockchain will need to have such a thing in place. So this is one thing. The second thing which will be required is root of trust, because if, as Amit is saying, if you can hack the device, then what will help you? You need to have some kind of root of trust in the device itself. So fully agree, and thank you very much for these wide answers. The next question which I would like to ask is, we will direct this to you, Rick, please. What do you expect from academic to focus on future research in the blockchain domain?
Yeah. I think we touch on one of the aspects of academic research, which is around security and privacy. Security, privacy, and scalability, which are the three places where we've been focusing on. That's probably where we expect the bulk of a lot of the work from academia to come. I think that we have a number of opportunities to make blockchains much more efficient in their compute, which we've talked about. The concept of the identity and the user experience with blockchain, I think, is another area that I don't think we thought about leveraging academia more for that type of system-level design. I think if you look at some of the work that IBM is doing with, with the secure key, is really going to test, right, whether you can do and apply blockchain to the protection of users' identity at higher scale. So I think academia is rich in opportunity in this space. As you know from our own work with IC3, we're exploring quite a bit of work in security and scalability. So that's where I expect a lot of the work in academia to come from. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, if we extend on that, the other thing that's going to happen that we're seeing with blockchains today is standardization and testing that out. And as the first big information exchange infrastructure was brought in through research and academia based on exactly that, how do we want to do it in standards? I think in blockchain we're already seeing that without academia jumping in and coming out and telling us how do we want to structure messaging, how do we want to start to look at things like how code fragments might be handled and managed and structures coming together. There's opportunities there in academia to bring standards to the industry to help us communicate what it is we want in the trust elements and in the segments and in the chains. That I think if we leave it just to the commercial aspects, we'll see them lean in too much into the business problems we want to solve, instead of maintaining what we see with blockchain, which is giving that value back to the individuals. So I really think those standards will be important as well.
I would like to add something about more concrete about the scalability. So there are people, people call blockchain as sort of a database. I think. It's a promise to be a database, but it's still not a database, at least not in the performance that it can provide, both in the throughput and the latency. No one of existing blockchain technologies are close to be any database. So if we envision, and I think we do envision it, to be basic technology for transactions, at least for some part of the transactions, we need to jump its throughput and latency orders of magnitude. And to be there, I think we are doing some research in Haifa Research Lab. We are working with academia, but I think there are a lot of open questions how we actually can do this in distributed environment where you don't have a single point of trust and single point of decision, but you still can reach this huge throughput numbers that will allow it to play the role we all envision it to play.
Thank you very much. And here in the audience we have researchers from different universities, not only from Israel. We have a group coming here from students from London just to be part of the Cyber Week, and they are really focusing on blockchain. So this is encourage you for doing your research, nevertheless, if you are doing your thesis or your PhD research. And I'm sure that the companies here on the panel will love to be in contact with you about defining the research problem related to that. And when we are talking about defining the research problem of blockchain, let's talk about privacy and blockchain. So the next question is, do you think blockchain will create privacy problems, or it will solve the privacy problems?
So I'll take that one if you want. So I guess if you take a look at solutions that we're building, we're creating sort of a decentralized trust models with blockchain solutions. And the idea is to put users in control of their privacy. Many of the things that we're seeing in terms of implementations from an identity management point of view, and as well as from a transactional perspective, are all about sort of the decentralization of trust. So there, in that case, we're trying to create a more privacy-friendly environment for those end users. I guess one of the things that we need to consider is the long-term effects of these kind of solutions that we're putting in place. And that maybe goes back to the research question as well, the previous question that you asked. We don't know what the long-term effects is even of the sort of assertions that we're making on the blockchain and the ledgers that we're building. And I think this is a topic that needs to be studied, actually, because there are lots of, you're creating an indelible list of transactions through a ledger, and every single one of those are recorded indefinitely over time. And the idea here is that you can maybe analyze this and doing sort of levels of analysis that is unknown in terms of the implications, in terms of metadata and the things that you can extract out of that. So perhaps it's both. Well, I think at the end of the day, it's both, right? So one is that we're creating these transactions, we're creating these systems that put privacy, give the end user more privacy and control. But in the end, we need to study the long-term effects of it, and part of the design around that, of the solutions that we build, need to take into the fact analytics and privacy as part of the solution that we're developing.
Yeah, I would say what's going to be interesting beyond even the privacy piece of it, it goes right into regulated information or regulations. I believe we're going to get to a place where we can mask things, or where we can get it to a place where it's contained enough. But when it comes to using blockchains in a sense of creating a series or links of trust or connections to information that forms in regulated or sensitive data outside of privacy, even that sequence, that heritage that you get with potentially a series of blockchains that are getting related to that same data creates potentially the issue of pointing to it. So it's going to be interesting to see, this just even the reference, even once we, let's say, mask or contain the information that we have to trust in the proofing, we still have evidence that's residual that regulation is still going to have to manage beyond individual privacy.
And I think that there's a bigger question here, and I think blockchain can be a symptom. What is privacy in the digital era? Because Google just announced that they're going to stop reading our emails. Thank you. They're still going to read our emails, by the way. It's like when we think about privacy, we're thinking like in the 1950s and 1960s. It's like standing here and saying that the earth is flat. And I think we need to redefine what privacy is, and then we'll be able to identify exactly what we want to protect and what we won't, because if for the greater good or for a personal good, sharing information, which we're considering now private, but in the future might not be, benefits me financially, benefits my life, my health, my family, I think that raises a lot of interesting questions. And again, to your point about the academia being a big part of it, I think that the notion of privacy is something that we really need to question going into the era of quantum computing and I would say the abundance of singularity.
So keep the microphone, because I want to ask you another question now. So two things. One, privacy is going to be an issue, and also all the legal and regulation around the blockchain is something that we heard previously in the keynotes that are going to be addressed by different governments around the world. And already we are seeing different approach to this area from Europe compared to US and compared to China. Each one of them are approaching blockchain totally different. How this is going to influence, we don't know. We are starting. And this brings me, Amit, to the next question about blockchain maturity. And also when you are answering what means of blockchain maturity, please define maturity for blockchain.
So maturity for blockchain basically is this room. As Hagai mentioned, 2 years ago, we stood in a room in the Google campus in front of 100 very enthusiastic blockchain or especially Bitcoin players or advocates, and we stood on stage and said that we don't believe in Bitcoin. We actually still don't believe in Bitcoin, but that's another discussion to have. But I think that going to the last presentation about blockchain 2.0, so blockchain 2.0 is us of the world looking at that very shiny tool and starting to play with it and mold it into the current business needs. Because blockchain 1.0 was F the system, basically. We don't need the trusted party, we don't need the banks, anarchy for all. And then we came in, and others like us, the financial institute, the aviation industry, the shipping industry, and said, you have a very nice platform to do stuff, again, faster, smarter, better, and cheaper, and more secure. So we're going to use it, and we're going to utilize it. Now, the question of maturing of blockchain is when you will be able to take current business models and transform them in a way that they will be run on blockchain or using the certain aspect of blockchain. Now that's the uniqueness and that's the key part. And what we're doing at Deloitte is exactly that. Just this year, Hagai, correct me if I'm wrong, around 30-something different use cases were brought to the world, not about what we can do with the zero knowledge, but how we can trade diamonds, how we can make sure, by the way, up to 10% of the parts in the airplanes that we're all flying with are fake. 10% are fake. Blockchain can solve that. Now think just about the insurance aspect of aviation while using blockchain. Shared economy is everything about blockchain. If I want to be able to use my car only 5% of the time and let someone else use it, I need to make sure that if he makes an accident, he does an accident, the police are going to him and not to me. That's blockchain. So I think that maturing is taking the business aspects and business applications of the amazing technologies and breakthroughs that we're seeing here and going to the business world. Because when you speak honestly about zero cash with a bank, it doesn't understand anything. When you go to have a business discussion and there are 3 equations on a slide, you're losing them. Maturing blockchain is saying how this will affect your business today or tomorrow. And I think that's the shift that the industry is starting to make. This is what we call blockchain 2.0. And I think we're just at the beginning. And there's a lot more to come.
Yeah. I want to add 2 things. First, I think we are there to, so basically the basic technology is there and it's ready for use. This is like, we are done with 1.0. So the hyperledger that we are leading as part of the open source community and others. So the basic fabrics are there to start using. The other part, I can add more examples to what Amit just mentioned about use cases and how we both see use cases where you just take current existing businesses and move them to blockchain, but also how you take something which was not digitalized. I think this diamond thing is one of the examples. Another is shipping and supply chains example, was Myers that IBM has. So we take something which was actually paper thing and was not digitalized, the whole shipping and how you actually follow your containers or your goods that are shipped all over the place. And there were about 30 places or 30 parties that were part of it. Now we can use blockchain, and we are already building solutions based on blockchain that you actually can know where things are, can provenance and actually control about how things are doing. So I completely agree with your point. We are in the beginning of the big thing of building solutions that will actually change the industry. So the maturity will be the next sort of step for this. So,
yeah, okay. So I guess when we look at maturity, we have a very sort of more precise definition of what it is for us. So I'll give you sort of the explanation of what we look at. When we say maturity, we look at the technology that we have available today, and we look at sort of where blockchain technology is developing, because it's obviously still developing, and it will be for a little while. And when it becomes an equally viable technology choice than what we are actually implementing today. We are a very large systems integrator. We do lots of systems designs and building systems for large corporates. And when we are now in the process of beginning sort of putting things into production-grade implementations of blockchain solutions, and this is the beginning of the journey. I think when we get into sort of the massive deployment of these solutions and the maturity of the technology over the next few years, then we're going to start seeing these things being deployed, and we'll call it mature. It's not mature yet, though.
Yeah, I think we usually in the technology industry say things are ready for production when you get to 3.0, right? And I think what's the bridge or the gap that's remaining is really around around trust, because most people are being very cautious about the way they deploy the technology. I cited the example of Alibaba and Australia Post and starting to look across boundary commerce. And I think when you start seeing those types of deployments happen, you know you're there. And I think the big missing ingredient is one of them is really people trusting the technology for trust, because they really do trust it.
Yeah, and just to close out on the technology stack, because that is important. Over the last 6 to 9 months at GE, we've done several projects looking at at using existing ledgers and blockchains in place, and look, frankly, like if we look at Ethereum today for production scale for some of the things that we're trying to do, it's still lacking in some certain areas. Same thing is true right now with the Hyperledger project. They're in good, 0.6 is in a good place right now. 0.8 is out there with some issues. 1.0, so I'm just talking about the ones that are available, the tech stacks that are out there right now. So they definitely need a ways to get to 3.0, but the business drivers have to be there in order to make that happen as well.
Excellent. So we are looking forward for blockchain 3.0. That means I will have some work for the next few weeks. The next question I would like to address to Rick. We start with you, please. When do we see signs that the industry is already reaching the tipping point for blockchain? And also I would like to ask you related to if we can really see huge implementation. We are hearing a lot of pilots, a lot of POCs all around the world. Every company has some pilot of a blockchain, but really doing a national project with blockchain, a really track and trace worldwide with blockchain, like tuna fish or whatever.
Well, I'm going to pass that token over to our system integrators here to answer that question, so go ahead.
So I think we are starting to see tipping points, but the interesting thing about the era that we're living in, which is the exponential era, is that you don't know you're in an exponential mode until the last step, right? And I think we're waiting for the iPhone of blockchain, for that matter, because there were touch screens before, right? There were companies playing with it for 10 years before that, but it was that killer app, or in that case, killer machine or device that really changed everything. And I think that's where we're actually trying to, and I completely agree that we are now in the race toward standardization. I think it's critical for that tipping point. Once it's like GSM versus CDMA, it's like Blu-ray versus, I don't even remember, and it's that agreement that is far enough in order for us to take it forward. Now, the interesting thing is that the tipping point, at least personally, I don't think it will be a public ledger. It will be a series of private ledgers of organizations working together. One of the nice examples that we use is the travel and leisure industry. Because when I buy a bundle of a flight and a cruise, someone needs to pay the other player. And there's a lot of transactions and a lot of money being involved that goes nowhere just to the middleman. Now think about a poker table that you can come in the morning, put your money, get your chips, all the players are playing together, zero transmission or zero fines in the way, and at the end of the day, you take the money back. So for us, the tipping point will be exactly jumping over there. Now, regarding what was mentioned by G is, and this is the work that Chagai mentioned coming soon. I don't know what is more exciting, the new season of Game of Thrones or report with Intel, but to be able to look from the business side and really translate a certain technology to your business challenges and then to the solution, I think that's what's missing. Because in the business mode, no one cares about when my mother is using her mobile phone to search something on Google, she doesn't need to understand the 7 layers of the internet, right? When my wife buys something, she doesn't understand Swift. If she did, maybe she'd buy less. And around that, I think that's what is missing, is the ability to connect between technology and business, but we're getting there. The gap is becoming smaller and smaller.
Yeah. You know, let me just make a point, because I think there are a couple of, you made a really good point on the public versus private and what to watch. And I think there are a couple of early POCs that are large scale that will start indicating whether this is really going to play out. I think IBM probably has a list of them where you've seen some large scale supply chain engagements. I think the work that R3 is doing, where you actually have, you know, around 80 banks that are partnering, if they actually get into production, you start seeing that number of banks supporting, you then will start getting an indication that this is getting to the point where it's real and more people will deploy.
So can I just jump in terms of the tipping point? We've seen, I guess if you take a look at financial services versus non-financial services environments, in the financial services space for a second, there's a lot of activity that's happening clearly in the payment space. And one of the things that we've been working on projects and implementation projects with various very large central banks and authorities around the world actually is there are 2 tipping points that we've identified. And this is based on research that we've done together with these central bankers, in addition to our own research as well. One is when we see sort of a large scale an implementation in the wholesale banking space for clearing and settlement using blockchain. That's the first. And to be honest, we're seeing that now. Actually, we are working on things like that at the moment. And the second one is really around tokenization of fiat money. And that is something that is coming. Governments and central bankers are actually working on things like this at the moment. And I think that's the interesting one where that'll push the envelope, because finally in the financial services model, you finally have the ability to do a delivery versus payment. So I can give you my securities, but I cannot take the cash. So I need to have a cash component of it. And from a cryptocurrency point of view, the public cryptocurrencies don't have enough liquidity and are volatile from a price perspective. So you need to have some other form of cryptocurrency to support that. So this is a very, very interesting dimension, and I think that will have a significant impact, I think, in the market. That's a tipping point that we've identified.
The other one that we want to talk about the private blockchains, I think this is important. Rick mentioned that one of the things that we're doing at GE in his talk was actually working with data sets. When it comes to industrial assets, one of the biggest things we're working with are collected data sets off of models of operational industrial machines. What's interesting is that the value is brought to the data set owner in combination with a model. And so if you think about blockchains, that's an interesting concept. And as a matter of fact, the number one driver that we have right now is how can the data owner, right, or maintain a knowledge of how that data set is being used. And if you think about the transfer of ownership, or at least the understanding and awareness and maintenance of usage of those data sets, that's something that we're really doing right now at GE. The problem we're getting into is the tech stack is missing some pieces that we're continuing to work on in order to make that happen. Once it does, though, being able to use information resources in these private chains that we may not even own, by the way, they may be owned by the data owners or someone else on their behalf, will become a valuable, we already see the application. It's a matter of the technology really emerging to get there.
Yeah, maybe to add something to the point, and it connects to the previous question about academia. So I think all of us mentioned the private or permissioned ledgers as something that will bring, more value to industry, and we believe that it will first mature. There are still gaps in privacy in that space, where how I share information, only the information that I want to share with the partners that I want to share the information, but I can prove to other partners that I, for example, have these tokens, money, or whatever, that I can do this operation without enclosing my whole history of events. So I think all of the chains there, and Hyperledger has its own model, others has its own, but no one in the full solution addresses this point. So this is for the academia part. Once this thing will have a good solution, I believe it will be another jump for the adoption of the blockchain. Maybe additional point about adoption, because blockchain requires network of participants, sort of network on companies. This is something that will start to be adopted first with the places where the network naturally exists, and then it will switch to the places where we believe we can create new networks. So this is 2 points about blockchain adoption in general.
So thank you very much. Now, your part. I want someone brave, or some woman, of course, that would like to ask our panelists question that, honestly, our panel is running. They know the question in advance and they prepare the answer. I don't know the answers. Now we will surprise them, and you are able to ask them a question that they don't know. So who would like to come? So I see 2 hands. 1 and 2, please come to the stage and ask the question. Come, both of you. So first, please present yourself, and then ask the question. If you like to address the question to a specific panelist, you are allowed. So in English. But if you don't mind, we will start with the ladies. No, okay, no problem.
Okay, so my name is Oren. I'm from IUCC. That's, in very few words, the ISP for the Israeli academia, or the NREN, if you know what it is. And my question is this. One of the things that was mentioned here is that blockchains are very vulnerable to all kinds of events that happen in the network, because the knowledge is distributed evenly over the network, and anything that happens in one point in the network affects the entire network. And a good example is how there are DDoS attacks on cryptocurrency exchanges, and they immediately drop the price, and of course somebody gains from it. That's why they did the attack. And my question is, what do you have in plan in order to tackle this? I mean, is there any research or implementations done in order to sort of stabilize the network and make it less vulnerable to all kind of butterfly effects?
Thank you very much.
Sure. Okay, so I guess first comment is really around whether these are permissioned or permissionless systems. So if we take a look at permissionless systems like Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies that are out there, of course you're vulnerable to those kind of situations where you have the ability to influence the market or the price and by affecting sort of the transactions that you can transact on that particular exchange. So there is obviously an element of that. What we focus on in the enterprise world is permissionless systems, where they're not susceptible to those kind of vulnerabilities in terms of affecting price and of a token specifically when you're doing those kind of DDoS attacks and so on. You can create disincentives, of course, for the people to do this kind of attacks on the system. But in reality, from our point of view, when we look at these kind of design and implementations, we look at it from a permission versus permissionless system, and permission systems are less susceptible to those kind of situations.
Yeah, I think the other piece that's going to be coming is what was mentioned in one of the presentations about where we are right now when it comes to scale and resiliency. I think we've got a ways to go when it comes to both scale and resiliency. So let's delete the internet component, or I should say some of the risk around the internet, and let's look at some of those other areas of challenge. Also, some of the what's also interesting is that messaging reference we talked about in the tech stack, time relevance, forward proper values. There's other kinds of methodologies that I can think of that the fun folks that really have time in the academia can go off and charge themselves with that could allow us to process and maintain things in these permissionless areas. So I would look for those kinds of areas to really drive those two elements in the tech stack and see the DDoS thing go out of the equation.
Yeah, I really appreciate the question. I hadn't thought about one of the positive side effects or some of the work that we're doing around making consensus cheaper from a computational perspective is the idea that we now can add more nodes to the network, right? Because there's also randomization built into the nodes, and so the more you can distribute the network and the more consensus nodes, in theory, and I'm not a network design person, so please, don't take my word for it, but I think there is a theory that says if you make it cheap enough, you can increase the number of consensus nodes, and therefore you can be less susceptible to that. Now, that doesn't, you talked about the data has to be stored somewhere, and so that's another aspect of the network that's not consensus related, and so there are other implications there. So your consensus, perhaps, topology can be better, DDoS proof, but you still have to store that data somewhere, and depending on how you architect your systems and your networks, you still may be susceptible. So maybe Vita's gonna
but I think once you handle the consensus, you cannot change the ledger. So actually, the most important part of submitting new things and changing the ledger, this one will be addressed by this. You can probably read the ledger from the other nodes, but you cannot change it. But I think it's very, very, very important point. So I think many of us building this addresses in different ways. So consensus is the first thing, and how we handle Byzantine peers is another part. So we are doing a lot of things to do it. It will be, I think, added step by step.
So thank you very much. For the last question, I know this was a long day for you. You need to come very early. Our Prime Minister started this morning. You need to pass all the security and the entrance. This is a challenge always. So Amy, your question now, please.
Hi, I'm Amy Sapan. I'm a lawyer at Amit Polak Matalon. So two things that I was hearing earlier. Amit, you brought up privacy and how we need to redefine privacy, and I thought that was a really cool point. As a lawyer, I guess when I think about privacy, I think about an individual. It's kind of a concern about what kind of information do I have that someone else could use in such a manner that causes me harm. And a lot of the speakers today, and thank you for coming, you guys have been speaking a lot about consensus, and I wonder if such a consensus-driven model can live together with such an individual-based concern. And jumping off from that for a second, when we're thinking about Bitcoin 3 already, whether Bitcoin is kind of like the internet generally, is it a kite or is it a drone? Is it something that's going to ultimately be tethered to the physical space and people, or is it something that's just going to take off and be very autonomous? And I wonder, because when we're talking about Bitcoin 2.0, it seems to be coming from industry leaders, and we're talking about currencies and valuations and pricing, and going off of what Amit was saying, do we need to redefine the way that we are thinking about economics and prices and valuation and stability? And one of the key concerns that's coming up, and I know there's a question here, and I'm sorry that it's so long-winded, but one of the key concerns that people are saying about Bitcoin and now with Ethereum is every 2 days there's a new cryptocurrency, so how is it ever going to stabilize? And when you have such a democratic, when it's not one person making a decision, now we're going to launch this currency and we're going to peg it against the dollar, we're going to peg it against the yen, what ended up happening. So there's a question there, talk, whatever.
So,
Thank you very much.
yes.
Next year, you are a speaker in this audience. I'm telling you, I will take your name later.
So I would say that, and please don't kill me. Cryptocurrencies are a smokescreen. Okay? They're, again, in my view, they're like Moses that got us almost to the promised land, but someone else will help us cross the River Jordan. Because the easiest way to explain blockchain is through cryptocurrencies. Yes, but for the matter of DDoS attacks and all, it doesn't make sense. Because at the end of the day, and for now my banking friends will hate me, the obvious low-hanging fruit is the financial industry, right? R3 and others. But in our view, it's kind of a honeypot. Because the real implication of blockchain are elsewhere, are in manufacturing, are in assurance, are in our world of auditing, by the way, much more than in banking. It's easy to start with a bank, and then it says, yeah, I want to be part of R3. Okay, oh no, I have 100 regulators that I need to answer to, and there's privacy issues and there's security issues, so Q4 2022 maybe we'll do something. And I think that when we were looking about the bubble or the hype, or the different cryptocurrencies, I think that that's a way to convey the message of the potential. Because when you, at the end of the day, when you think about what blockchain is not about cryptocurrency, is not about security, is not about privacy, is the next revolution of the digital era. Is basically how you control, transfer, and hold assets in the digital era. Now that's everything. Once you figure out that that's the end game, plus a current business model, then everything falls into place. Then I think privacy questions are kind of a secondary questions. Because if, again, the better financial, the better business, the better personal good overcomes, I think that's one thing. So where will it go? Will it be Bitcoin 2.3 or 2.0, sorry, or 3.0? I think it's less relevant. I think what is relevant is when GE will start using their own protocol to control machinery through the blockchain. Is where security on the chip by Intel will have a blockchain implication. Is where IBM, is where Accenture, is where Deloitte will use it in different verticals to deliver value. So when we think where the industry is going and where privacy and what's the debate will be next year, so I think that next year the blockchain summit of Cyber Week will have to be in Smolaj, I really think. And I think it will be much more about, because this is the year of us, not about POCing, it's about taking to the real world. And I think the next year on stage we'll speak about real business implications. How you control factories, how you control supply chains, how you control shipments, how you control politics, elections, whatever, through the notion of no centralized organization, the best privacy yet, maybe, the best security yet, maybe. We're just waiting for the next hack. So I think coming out of, or at least our message coming out of this room is, again, think about how you can implement it now, because if you have a good idea, there are a lot of giants in the world that are waiting to speak with you.
Yeah, and I think, Amit, you hit it right on the head there. What we're seeing right now is where Jacob asked the question about a physical thing that represents my digital me, that's going away, right? And so how do we, and this is precisely where we see it in GE, is we can't have people bringing the physical thing anymore if we're in the digital world. They need to detach themselves from it, and the trust has to be in bringing together the understanding of those assets through the blockchain itself, and that capability is where things will be. So the protocols that drive the elimination of that physical thing that we need to represent the digital me will be the answer. And I think the financial transaction and element was a perfect lab experiment in showing people how well that can scale and really happen and still have trust.
Well, my comment, sorry that you picked up the microphone, is that next year we'll do it in a bigger venue. We'll start it earlier. And I think we've kept you long enough. It's 6:30. I think it's time for everybody to go.
Yes, so, so the following, what we will do, because we want to finish in time and let you go each one to his party, but because we are in the academia, I would like to conclude this session by a question. You don't need to answer. Panelists, you can think about that. So first of all, before throwing the question to you and say thank you very much to you first, I would like to thank you, our panelists, please. So related to next year that we will do this in the main auditorium, already Professor Ben Israel said that this is what we are going to do and really driving this blockchain as a center for the world and building this innovation here in Israel. And the question which I would like everyone to think about it, okay? Without any political standing, do you think that if blockchain has been implemented in the US election, is anyone will able to manipulate the results? So this is a question to think about it. Thank you very much. Enjoy your party today. Bye.